Now, let's talk about the stages of the election process. I would like to break the stages of the election process into 3 stages. 1, we have the pre-election stage. 2, we have the election stage. And 3, we have the post-election stage. And I'm going to break them down into simpler forms and in such a way that we understand some of the activities that make up the various stages of the election. Like I said, the election cycle is a process, is a lot of activities that culminate into one end of election to another election. So now, we are going to talk about the pre-election stage. We are going to talk about the pre-election stage and the roles expected of the election volunteer at this stage. The pre-election stage is actually the beginning of the election cycle, where people are expected to do some of the preliminary things that will lead up into qualifying them to vote in an upcoming election. So now, during the pre-election stage, there are various things that an election volunteer is expected to do. During pre-election stage, that's the time that the internal structures of a political party is being formed. What this means is that the election volunteer will have a duty to actually talk to people about belonging to a political party, registering as a member of a political party, and participating in a political party. As GoVote champions, during the pre-election stage, it is your duty to talk to the young people, talk to the women, talk to other members of society for them to join a political party. Because it is at that level of joining a political party that they will become part of the decision-making processes that will culminate into who actually gets to hold the flag of a particular political party in an election. Most of the time, when young people like GoVote champions talk about the number of women or the number of young people in political activities or who are flag bearers of political parties, it actually starts from the pre-election stage, which is the stage where members of political parties get registered and also get to decide who is going to flag their flags. So, as GoVote champions, at this stage, it is your duty to advocate for more people to become part of political parties and participate. Also at the pre-election stage, the political parties have their party elections. Different political parties at the pre-election stage have conventions where they bring out who holds different positions in their political parties. National secretary, chairman, youth leader, women leaders, and all those kind of roles. So at that stage also, it is the role of the election champion, election volunteers, to encourage and make sure that young people or their target audience participates in the political parties so that they can have more decision-making powers in that political party. This also leads up to the party primaries. The party primary is also another pre-election stage. It's also an activity that takes place in the pre-election stage. So, what happens at the party primaries is that the different political parties pick the people who are going to go into the elections on their behalf, who are going to be their candidates they are presenting for the people to vote for in an election. And what is the role of the election volunteers and election champions here? Their role is also to ensure that people participate well, ensure that people are part of this process, so that at the end of the day, the people that the political parties are going to bring out will reflect the choice of the majority of the people in the community. So as volunteers, they advocate, they push, and they also encourage people to be part of this process. Also, one very important aspect of the pre-election stage is the voter registration exercise. At the beginning of every election cycle, the electoral body, in Nigeria's case, the INEC, would usually open up the registration portal and registers. In the case of Nigeria, the INEC, they would usually open up the election registers and the registration portals for people to register. So in that case, those who were not able to register initially in the previous elections, or those who turned the eligibility age of 18 after the last election cycle, will be able to register and be able to vote in an election. And this is a very important stage, because that's when more people are expected to come on board the eligibility and come on board to qualify to vote in an election. So, what's the role of the election volunteers and election champions during the voter registration exercise? This is the time where they will all go all out to make sure that they educate and sensitize the people on the need and reason why they should register to vote in an election. Educate the people on why they will not be able to vote in an election if they are not registered and if they do not have their PVCs. So, after the registration exercise, one other important part of the pre-election stage is voter mobilization. Go vote champions. People who have registered to vote in an election, most of them also do not have their permanent voters card, and most of them didn't even have the intention of going to collect their permanent voters card. So it is the role of the election volunteers, the election champions, the Go Vote champions, to go all out to mobilize these people, also sensitize them to go beyond the practice or the exercise of registration to collect their permanent voters cards so that they can now be eligible to vote in an election. So the mobilization could happen at different levels, in the communities, in school, in the neighborhood, on radio, in the media, using any means available to reach out to people, to mobilize the people, to be part and fully part of the pre-election stage and complete that stage so that they can now move into the next stage of the election cycle, which is the election itself. Now, the election stage. The second stage of the election cycle is the election stage, after the pre-election stage. So now, during the election stage, there are a whole lot of activities that take place. And then there are a whole lot of activities that the Go Vote champions or the election volunteers should be part of in the election cycle. So at the election stage, that is the time the election is taking place proper. And after the campaigns, after the activities, after the whole of the things that lead up to the election, the role of the Go Vote champions, especially on the election day, are spelled out for them. When I was an election volunteer, part of the things I did was to ensure that the polling units where elections were going to take place were clean, in order, were peaceful, and we go and stand to make sure that people who are supposed to vote, voted, and those who are supposed to be on queue were on queue, and those who are elderly were taken care of at the beginning of the election, were taken care of early enough, and just to maintain orderliness during elections. So now, what are the roles of the election volunteers on the election day? First, is the role of the election volunteer on election day to first of all ensure that people who are coming to vote understand what they are coming to do, understand the process the election is going to take place and going to take. For instance, interpret and translate to people, especially people with disabilities, on certain things and certain processes put in place for them to vote. Explain to people who are coming to the polling units the process that the election is going to take. For instance, saying there's going to be an accreditation. After accreditation, don't go home, wait for some minutes before you cast your vote, or to say, okay, accreditation and voting, they are going to happen simultaneously. People need to know exactly what is going to happen, how the process of the election is going to go. And it is the work of the election volunteers to explain to people. Poll center setup. It is the role of the election volunteers also to set up the poll center. And set up means setting the tables, bringing out the tables, helping the election officials to put the tables in order, put them in the appropriate places, put the polling cabins in the places where they should be, and make sure that everything is properly set up. It is also the role of the election volunteer on the election day to guide the people with disabilities and guide the elderly on the process they are supposed to follow. Either help them to reach the point where they are going to vote, or assist them to cross over if they're on wheelchair and all that, and help them to maneuver the terrain where the election or the polling station is situated. Also, orderliness. Election volunteers, typically on election day, are responsible for making announcements, for telling people what to do, for ensuring that people are on queue, to ensure that people are not angry and people are not tired, or people are not losing interest in the process. It is also the role of the election volunteers. Certain election volunteers also help to watch the votes. They stay in the polling units and they report to security agencies, oh, there's a problem going on here, oh, they report to the electoral bodies, oh, the materials are yet to get to this place. They report to even the media of the things that happen in a particular place at a particular time. So different election volunteers volunteer to do different things during the election. Also, in certain places, election volunteers are the only people who are allowed to hand in edibles like water to voters. Already you know that during elections and on election day, political parties are not allowed to give drinks or food or any kind of things to voters. But election volunteers, because they are assumed to be apolitical and because they are assumed to be working for the common good of the people, they are in most cases allowed to give people water if the sun is too much, to give people the kind of things that will make them comfortable and wait to vote in an election. Voter reporting and also voter observation is also part of the roles of election volunteers. Some of the reports on the elections that took place in different places actually come from feedbacks from election volunteers. In some places, the election volunteers write reports of how the election was conducted in certain places and escalate it to some civil society organizations, to some security agencies, or to the electoral bodies, or some other people who will now compile those reports, compile those observations, compile those feedbacks, and write a report on how and what transpired in different polling units during the elections. So, there are many other things that election volunteers could do. So it depends on which one that fits your interest, that matches your skills and capability. You can choose a wide range of things to volunteer on during the elections. And after then, we'll now move on to post-election responsibilities or roles. The post-election stage is actually technically the last stage in an election cycle. And there are also roles expected of election volunteers, Go Vote champions, or election champions at this stage. The election does not end with announcing of the results. Also, participation in an election does not end after the results have been announced and the winners have been declared. Civic responsibilities of every citizen continues beyond the elections. And that is also where the Go Vote champions come to play a role. First, after the elections, there's always a review of how each election was conducted, what transpired during the elections. It's also the role of the election volunteers to contribute to the reviews, the feedback based on the observations that they have made in certain polling units. Report writing. This is also another post-election activity which also involves the election volunteers, also based on the feedbacks and observations that they've made working and contributing as volunteers during an election. But one important aspect of post-election is the participation of citizens in the governance of a country. So at this point, the GoVote champions are expected to also mobilize citizens to begin to ask questions, to begin to hold their leaders to account, to begin to also actively participate in making sure that the governments in place that have been elected in a particular election cycle also go on to do the things that the majority of the community would want them to do. Citizens are not expected to go and rest because elections have come and gone. So at this stage, the election champions go all out to ask people to come and speak out, talk your own, talk in the media, write letters, make complaints, help government, support government, hold government to account if they start to do things that are not supposed to be done in a democracy. Because those are the ways that you show participation in an election. And this is a part of post-election in every democracy. Another post-election stage is also agenda setting. When elections come and winners have been declared, the citizens have the responsibility, the civic responsibility of setting the agenda for the new government, setting the agenda for the government. And setting the agenda basically means you tell the government what you want as a citizen. You make your demands from the government as a citizen. You tell the government the direction that they should do. You tell the government the direction that they should go to make things better for the members of society. And that is a function of the citizen. That's a function of the election volunteers in mobilizing voices, mobilizing the people to do these things in the right way. So, I believe that with all these and a lot more, you already know and you now know some of the things and some of the roles that you can play at the different stages of the election cycle as a volunteer and in fulfillment of your civic responsibilities.